Hi everyone, welcome to the ASUS PCDIY Graphics Card Show. This week we're going to have some quite cool stuff for you, no pun intended. We're going to be focusing on the RTX 4080 Noctua, and here to help me break it down for you is JJ.
Hey everybody, happy to be here again for another graphics card stream. We took a little bit of a break, and I think that's probably just a little bit of an update that we'll give you guys is that moving forward, you won't necessarily always see the graphics card stream week to week. There might be maybe a little bit of a bi-week or potentially maybe even a little bit more, but most situations should probably be maybe about a bi-weekly cadence. But as always, if you guys are subscribed, of course, to the ASUS Graphics North American YouTube channel and following our corresponding socials, which Jake, I'm sure you can go ahead and share those socials with us, right? You can let us know. You'll find out about as soon as when we are going to be doing a graphics card stream, so you can be kept in the loop, right? Because as of right now, we've got 3 socials. Is that right, Jake?
That's correct. So as always, you can follow us on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook at the ASUS Graphics NA tags. And as JJ mentioned, these streams won't necessarily be weekly. We're definitely going to be focusing on making sure that when we're live and bringing news to you guys, that it's relevant and it's worthwhile updates for you. Oftentimes we'll be here to discuss when GeForce Experience has a new driver, or especially for things like today where we have a really exciting new launch to discuss, and even some new games that have recently come out. I'm sure JJ is probably pretty hyped for the Counter-Strike 2 announcement.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge competitive player. For me, most of my gameplay experience, right? I'm a big fan of always single player narratives, big fan of simulation, RTS, racing, action RPG, right? Those are generally my simulations. But at the same time, I think I always have to be kind of cognizant of anything that happens in that competitive, shooting scene, whether you're talking about Valorant, Apex, CSGO, Overwatch, Fortnite, any one of those games, because one, they have huge player bases, and they also really drive to a large degree, right? I think a lot of the technology, right, when we're talking about things like ultra high refresh, right, whether you're seeing features in like NVIDIA Reflex being incorporated, right, aspects of how you want to benefit from, like, let's say, incorporating not only your GPU to your monitor and having things like, low response time and high refresh rate and be able to have better motion clarity. So I always think it's always interesting when a game, especially like CSGO, which has really been kind of probably the industry stalwart when it comes to competitive first player shooter, gets an update. And here, this is a massive update because I don't think necessarily anybody was expecting everything to drop as it did. So pretty exciting and pretty cool update. But there's actually quite a number of updates, I think, for this stream. We've got definitely some cool game news, some new game engines that are going to be seeing DLSS 3, NVIDIA Reflex support. There's actually 2 new drivers. Jake went ahead and noted actually here in our log here that we've got, of course, the GeForce Ready driver. But for those of you that might be creators that are also checking out our stream, there's actually also been an update to the NVIDIA Studio driver. So if you guys aren't familiar with that, we'll touch on that in a little bit as well. We've got some other cool kind of generalized updates in terms of some partner news, and then also some cool promotions right there for, I think, 3070, 3060 Ti, and 3060 based ASUS graphics cards, plus the formalized announcement of a long-awaited kind of new update for the 40 series with the ASUS, of course, RTX 4080 Noctua Edition, which I know a lot of people have been waiting for. So, Jake, let's go ahead and kick things off.
Absolutely. So as JJ mentioned, we're going to start off with the new Game Ready driver. This is going to be 531.41. It just came out very recently. It's actually primarily geared towards the Diablo 4 kind of beta release. And since it is a beta, there's going to be a lot more coming out to it because this one's only really launching with DLSS 2 to start. But getting into it later on, that's actually going to upgrade to DLSS 3 once the game actually goes properly live in, I think it's June 6th.
So right now it's in the beta. I know I don't know if anybody's tried it out there. I'm super stoked about it. Definitely I think Diablo, for me, was a huge fan of Diablo 3. Spent actually a lot of time playing it. I really loved it. And of course, it was definitely one of those games that I think there was a lot of continued course expansion with the seasons and things along those lines. You could of course play through, have different, of course, characters, different classes, of course, you could jump into. So very cool to be able to see that, you're going to be able to have essentially that benefit for DLSS 3. It wasn't necessarily the most demanding title of the prior generation, but of course here seeing that we're going to get more graphics fidelity upgrades right across the board. I think anything to be able to have that really buttery smooth experience. And I think the other big part that's always cool when you see DLSS 3 being implemented that a lot of people forget about is that inherently includes NVIDIA Reflex, which helps to kind of optimize the display chain, right? So you have that low latency experience. It's integrated inherently. So I think for a game, when you talk about super hack and slash, right, which Diablo is known for, that's I think a critical part to it. So that's going to be pretty cool to see. What else in terms? I think there was also another game that saw a DLSS 3 update, right?
That's correct. So Forza Horizon 5, which you mentioned being a fan of racers, so this might appeal to you as well, JJ, but that's actually going to get DLSS 3 integration as well.
Yeah, and I'm super stoked about this. So if you guys have kind of seen information in terms of kind of the group, if you guys are not part of our ASUS PCDIY group, you'll definitely know I'm a big fan of the game. And this is now, of course, the upcoming, of course, expansion, right, that's going to be hitting. And I think this is super exciting to be able to see this feature get in there. This game already ran really well on 40 series based graphics cards. But again, if you're looking to drive that highest level of fidelity, which this game absolutely looks stunning when you crank up all the image quality settings, it's really an amazing game when you talk about wanting to be able to drive 1440p, 4K, or an ultra wide, right? And then being able to even drive also an HDR experience. It's fantastic. And then being able to also, like I said, enable that DLSS to be able to see those, frame rates where you're then talking about, 160, 180, 200, 240, frames a second. That's really, really exciting. Again, to be able to see that type of feature. So very, very cool addition. One that I'm really excited about.
Absolutely. As JJ mentioned, it's just always great to see that you can kind of get some extra performance out of that. And then we've got another big one that is going to be coming up very soon, is kind of the first push into path tracing. And I think JJ is going to talk a little bit more about this during the stream. But RTX has been around for 5 years now, 4 years now.
Yeah, well, and ray tracing, of course, has been around for a long time, right? But of course,
Yes.
the advent of it was, of course, within the 20 series, right? That was the first GPU class that NVIDIA released ray tracing. Then we saw it in 30 series, and now we're really seeing, I think, it start to come into its own now with 40 series. And I think the really exciting part is, if you guys haven't seen some of the announcement information that's coming out from NVIDIA, is that there's now essentially additional kind of API information and support that's going to be given to the game developers. And the really cool part about this is that right now, full path ray tracing is something that you've generally kind of only maybe seen in demos. So if we kind of I think I have an image right here that I can show you guys. You can see a little bit kind of a comparative example of kind of the experience that you have when you talk about, let's say, base and then full path tracing. So you can really see that when you have rasterization, then you go to ray trace, and then you go to path trace, and you can see just how much more kind of real world representation happens in terms of all those reflections and that lighting that happens when you go through path trace. So path tracing is a lot of times what we see, of course, in the most taxing and in the most advanced type of kind of cinematics. So it's been very common, of course, to see this within kind of the movie industry, but in games, it's been really, really demanding. But that's the cool part, right? Is NVIDIA's made these kind of improvements based in terms of their architecture. With now we have the further improvements in the RT cores that are present in the 40 series, along with this new framework that's being provided to developers. Where you saw kind of glimpses of this in like Portal RTX and in Quake RTX, which were great, really kind of I'd say kind of proof of concepts. But now it's going to be really exciting to be able to see this. And I think probably one of the real first titles that we're going to really see, I think not complete path tracing, but a much, much bigger representation of this is going to be in the Cyberpunk update, which this is kind of laying the foundation for. So that's, I think, what you might have been getting to, right, Jake?
That's correct. And honestly, one of the things that has me most excited about this is there's been a few games out that are kind of already heralded as really good representations of ray tracing. JJ mentioned it with Portal. I know that Control has been kind of a poster child as well.
Yeah,
but
Minecraft is actually really good too.
Yes. And so having some of those, and then knowing that, you haven't really unlocked the final form of it yet, even while it's already that good, it has me really hyped for how this is going to be and what kind of the final iteration for ray tracing is going to end up being. So I'm really hyped to see how this turns out, even though I actually haven't gotten to spend much time playing Cyberpunk myself. Just knowing the tech and seeing what's on the horizons got me pretty stoked.
Yeah, so I'd love to see, from your guys' feedback right now, how many of you guys have actually maybe been playing something and toggled on that RTX, or maybe how many of you right now are even running an RTX class-based graphics card, right? So I think that's always kind of an interesting thing. And I think, of course, generation to generation, we're seeing this kind of improve in terms of course, the number of not only games, but the number of users that are, of course, enabling it, right? But I think also, if you haven't gotten into something like Cyberpunk, this is a great time. I think with all the improvements, all the patches, right? All the work that CD Projekt Red has kind of put into it, right, along with this next real big update that we've got here, right, with this RT Overdrive, it's going to be a pretty exciting opportunity to really kind of be able to see where we're going, right? And a lot of this also aligns with some really cool stuff. If you guys are also seeing some of the announcements coming out from Unreal, where Unreal their integrated game engine is heavily leveraging a lot of like advanced like real-time lighting and global illumination and actual ray tracing technologies built into the engine. And so the really cool part about this is with Unreal being really such a baseline engine that's used across so many games, even when you don't directly necessarily see that it has NVIDIA RTX support, the work that NVIDIA is putting in terms of having an advanced ray tracing, essentially architecture kind of built into the way that they design and develop their GPUs, it's really exciting because it essentially means you're going to be able to jump into that game and be able to see really impressive ray trace performance. And also you see just a bigger proliferation of that technology kind of coming into play. So it's pretty exciting, pretty cool. Yeah, so
Yeah, I couldn't
Michael
agree
notes
more.
right here that he actually checked out the Unreal stream and noted some really cool stuff. And I definitely agree. If you guys haven't checked out some of the tech demos that are coming out from the Unreal stream announcement, absolutely insane. I definitely would say maybe some of the most impressive tech demos that I've seen in maybe like the last 5 years. Just the level of detailing, the foliage, I think was absolutely insane. And then some really cool stuff also that NVIDIA is doing that kind of happens more on the kind of the high end side of the development side, but some really cool stuff that they're doing with kind of Omniverse and how that's actually going to think allow for even more developers to be able to integrate more advanced, you know, uh, representation of different types of mechanics, whether you're talking about voice, whether you're talking about movement, and you're talking about a lot of different things, which depending on the size of the development team, these things can be really complicated and really complex in terms of implementing. So having essentially like a tool set that helps to streamline that and kind of break down the barriers of complexity is pretty exciting, because it ultimately just means that us as gamers can enjoy kind of more rich and dynamic environments, which are pretty cool. Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. And we touched about it a little bit in the last stream when discussing DLSS 3, but JJ just touched again on it here that, Unreal Engine, they're starting to integrate more options for the developers, like kind of baked into things, and having options like over-the-air updates and just these tools already easily accessible means that a lot more developers are going to be able to make use of this. And so while oftentimes for general users, especially like myself, I don't necessarily care about all these fancy tools that a developer has because I don't understand it, or like, what does that mean to me? How does that actually translate to being used in the game? But I think it's going to become more and more apparent as time goes by just how useful those are as more games start to feature things like DLSS 3 or Reflex, or having the like more in-depth ray tracing options available to them. And I know that like when RTX first launched, it was, just a small handful of games have this feature. It was almost felt a little bit gimmicky at the start, but now look how many games are utilizing ray tracing, and look how many games are coming out with each of these new GeForce Experience updates or announcements mentioning DLSS 2 and DLSS 3. So it's becoming very widespread, and these tools and the availability and accessibility of them only means that's going to increase.
Yeah. So, I'll go ahead and I'll share some links in here. And again, for some of us, I think at the end of the day, we're just really excited, of course, about playing the games themselves. Sometimes we're not necessarily always super focused on the kind of the behind the scenes of the technology to enable it. But I always find it really interesting because, of course, this is directly what does affects us as gamers, right? And I think it's also important from kind of a an industry perspective, right, to be able to see where kind of the focus in terms of development and resources are being put forth, being able to see that, you essentially have an SDK that's being put out there. That's important because, especially with the strong partnerships that exist, it just allows essentially these really cool technologies to see essentially more proliferation, right? And that's, I think, the big point, right, that ultimately we're seeing right here is that something as a small, that might seem as like a small announcement that, hey, this SDK is being put out there, all of a sudden now starts to help to kind of turn that maybe trickle much more into a bigger movement, right, in terms of what we're seeing. So pretty cool. So what else do we have there, Jake?
I think that kind of about covers it for the updates. I do want to take a second to kind of highlight some of the hype games. We kind of already mentioned Counter-Strike 2. Unfortunately for me,
I do want to go
Counter-Strike
ahead and note though, maybe before you jump into that, just for reference then, is just keep in mind, guys, that in addition to the standard game ready driver, right, NVIDIA has also gone ahead and released an actual studio driver update, which also just came out yesterday. So the studio driver, it's actually pretty similar right here. It's a 53141 in terms of the studio driver. And so for those of you who are not essentially aware what's the difference between essentially the game ready drivers and the studio drivers, is that studio drivers are essentially designed more for, let's say, the creator space. So they're essentially optimized for stability and performance within applications like, let's say, Adobe DaVinci Resolve, Autodesk 3D Studio Max, a wide range of different types of applications. And they can actually affect not only things like functionality and stability and performance, but even actually image quality. So if you're maybe, let's say, like I said, a creator, and maybe you're leveraging something like a 3060 Ti, a 3070, a 4070 Ti, but your focus isn't necessarily gaming, but it's actually the creation workflow, you're generally recommended to want to consider using the studio driver as opposed to the GeForce Game Ready driver. Game Ready drivers, right, are going to be optimized in terms of not only their performance, but their latency, how they actually do CPU bound management, and a lot of other things are all baked in and kind of optimized for that gaming type scenario, as opposed to, like I said, a creation type scenario. And because here, that's the cool thing, is that graphics cards see a lot of different usage. It's not just about gaming. It could definitely be on the creation side of the fence. It provides value to that too. So I'm going to go ahead and share the link over for those that might be interested, and also checking out that NVIDIA Studio Driver. And when you do look up for them, you'll find that they're listed in the same way. So right here, you can actually see at the top, it does say NVIDIA Studio Driver. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat there.
Thank you, JJ. And while he does that, like I said, I wanted to talk about, I guess, two of the most hyped games, potentially for the year at this rate. But how many of you have seen the announcement for Counter-Strike 2 or Diablo 4? And are you guys like hyped for either of them? What are you looking forward to right now?
Yeah, I'd love to see what some people's kind of commentary is in there. There's actually been quite a number of game announcements, I think, literally over the last, few weeks. But definitely, I know Diablo 4 has been a big one that a lot of people have kind of been really waiting for. But there's even, I think, actually, even in this kind of same kind of vein, there is some other cool stuff that is going to be coming up too, like Redfall, which right now is also seeing a promo that is actually going on right now, where if you do pick up an ASUS 40 series card, so this would apply if you pick up a 4070 Ti, a 4080, or a 4090, you actually get Redfall included within your purchase. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with Redfall, let me go ahead and actually bring up a little link here. It's pretty cool because it's actually made by the developers that created, I believe, Dishonored and Prey, which are two very kind of cool, I think, like first-person centric games, but they're more in that kind of story narrative. But the cool part is, if you guys have been maybe somebody that is interested in like co-op, so like I know for me, like take for instance, like one of the, of course, most popular games that a lot of people will talk about this when you're talking about a game like FPS co-op is going to be something like Left 4 Dead, right? Left 4 Dead was a perfect example where you might jump in with your friends and play the game, right, in kind of a co-op mode, and be in that story environment. And so here, same thing. I think the co-op is up to 4 players that you have. And then again, with the focus that they have kind of on story, I think a really advanced, rich environment that they really do a great job, which has been shown in the work that they did in Dishonored, as well as the work that they did in, like I said, Prey. I'm pretty actually excited about this. And this game will also be supporting DLSS. So I'll drop in. This is actually the full gameplay trailer that they just dropped. So the cool thing is it's actual gameplay, right? It's not just kind of the standard kind of story trailer. It's like 10 minutes long, so we're not going to see the whole thing here. But it's actually pretty cool, pretty interesting. Maybe one of those things. Maybe some people in the group. Maybe let's get together and let's do like a four-way like team and see if we can pass the game. It might be kind of fun, kind of interesting. Because usually these campaigns, they're not that long. I'd probably say maybe something like 10 or 12 hours or something like that. But I think it's fun. For me, I'm definitely much more on that co-op side of the fence as far as what I find interesting as opposed to the competitive side of the fence. But I'd love to know, did any of you guys play Prey? Did any of you guys play Dishonored? What do you think? Have you checked out maybe Redfall, or like what Jake was noting, right? Are you maybe more interested in, Diablo, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely curious myself about Redfall because while I never played Prey or Dishonored myself, I know that Dishonored built up a fairly decent cult following that kind of was really into the series. So I'm curious to see how this one does, especially as JJ mentioned, there's been a little bit of a drought of the kind of this co-op play together games of this style. So it'll be interesting to see how it does. We actually have a couple people too. It looks like Michael has been playing the closed beta for Diablo 4 so far, and that we actually have another user as well who has been excited for Diablo 4 as well.
Pretty sweet, pretty sweet. Yeah, I think, for a lot of people, that's going to be definitely probably a key game. I think interesting for both probably Diablo and Counter-Strike. You're talking about games that also have a very long-term kind of play base. Actually, even very similar to, one that I talked about previously, where I was really interested in Company Heroes. So games that once they get released, the kind of the player base stays with them for years. So it's not like a game that sometimes people like play and then kind of it's like it's over, right? The experience, right, kind of like becomes then like seasons, right? It's like, oh, I'm waiting for the next season or for the next DLC or for the next kind of expansion. Kind of similar, to a lot of maybe interest that people might have had, like jumping into something like Destiny, which has seen, a lot of different updates that have come out with, of course, the most recent one, of course, coming out not that long ago. So pretty interesting to just see how it comes out. Yes, Neff notes right here is that he was actually Dishonored is a really great game. I agree. I think the dev team that they have here is actually a really solid dev team. So I'm pretty excited. I'm pretty actually excited to see how Redfall looks out. And I'm pretty juiced, like I said, of the fact of being able to, have a cooperative gameplay experience, be able to have a cool upgraded engine and some really cool gameplay mechanics. Again, if you guys check out the trailer, it looks pretty sweet. And I will go ahead and I think I already did I drop that in the chat? No, it looks like, but Jake, you already dropped in the promo, right?
Yeah, I got you covered on this one, JJ.
Okay, yeah,
for anyone
very
who
cool.
didn't already see the message pop up, definitely go check that out. Especially if you're already interested in getting a 40 series card soon, now's a great time to get it and go ahead and grab that game bundle.
Very cool. All right. So what else have we got?
Well, we're going to take a short break from kind of the gaming side of things and quickly talk about the hardware side. So this has been out for just a little bit, but we've also had a little bit of a break. So we're going to go ahead and highlight that Corsair has launched their Tough series water block, their Hydro X series for the Tough RTX 40. And we've kind of discussed water cooling in general a little bit, and that, with the new coolers, we're going to be talking about one of those today with the Noctua, but the coolers are getting a lot better for the cards. Size is increasing, and that is definitely one of the aspects for choosing something like one of these shorter water blocks, especially if you're going small form factor. But that a lot of it these days are kind of coming into the aesthetics. So Corsair for sure has a very unique aesthetic to their designs for their cooling series. So if that's something you've been into or looking to save space, always an option.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that probably kind of similar to maybe Fantex, right? In terms of that, they're kind of their ID design is very distinct to them, so they very much have kind of an identity that is very much Corsair when it comes to the water cooling design element. So definitely, I think for us, the main focus that we're, of course, continue to advocate is that, right now, I think we probably have best in class water block support in the industry for our cards. Pretty much every premier manufacturer that is producing blocks is working with ASUS, and that's something that we're really proud of. It's actually taken quite a bit of effort because to give you guys some perspective, we do actually have to coordinate our product management team, and our R&D team from headquarters has to then co-work with the partners, be able to get them actually render files and kind of help to make sure that they have all the information they need so they can go ahead and do their mock-ups and then go ahead and go through the design and development stage and then ultimately be able to produce the blocks. So, you know, right now from EK to Corsair to Fankex to AlphaCool to Baiski, you know, really, again, I think pretty much every premier block manufacturer right now does make a block for ASUS series cards. So it's pretty cool, again, to be able to see a partner like Corsair come on board as well here and have another option here for the Tough Gaming line, which is also pretty cool because, you know, in the past, historically, Strix cards were where the priority of block production focus occurred. But for the 40 series, this is where we actually changed a little bit of the design topology, and we made the design essentially more consistent between the two to allow for more block interoperability. So essentially, kind of almost for the first time really in our series history, if a block kind of works for the Strix card, it works also for the Tough Gaming card, which is pretty cool, where that hasn't necessarily been the case. Like in the past, you know, if we had a block for the Strix card, it was specific for the Strix. And if you had a Tough Gaming graphics card, you would have to wait to see if a water block manufacturer did develop one.
Yeah, and I think that's great because JJ, you and I have kind of mentioned in the past streams that we know that water cooling is still important to a lot of people. I mean, that's where I came from. And since you can now get a block that will fit a Tough or a Strix, it's often worthwhile to grab that Tough series card versus the Strix because you're going to be pulling the cooler off of it anyways. So, you know, saving that little bit of money and putting that towards the block versus buying the Strix and basically not making use of the fantastic cooler on it can often be a kind of better overall value to you. So I'm very happy to see that, you know, it supports both to give you the option.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that point. Jake makes a really good point right there that, you know, we do get kind of that question sometimes within the community where people are asking, hey, what's the right card to water block? And what I generally tell people is, you know, if you're going to water block, go with the Tough Gaming graphics card because a lot of the costs and the design and the development work that we put into the card is, of course, prioritized on both in terms of making a cooler, quieter, and faster card, even in comparison to the very good quality and performant FE card. But we are cooler, quieter, and faster than the FE card. But one of the cool things that the Strix offers, right, is that it has even a more advanced, like, you know, milled vapor chamber design, right? It has more ARGB lighting, right? It has these fan connect headers, right? So it has elements that, like, when you go to the water block, you know, you're losing some of that additional value proposition, right? There is some technical merit, right? Like you could say, hey, maybe if you want a little bit better, you know, stock quote unquote performance because it might have a higher TGP, right? That's defaulted like 500 watts versus like 450 watts, or it might have a little bit higher clock. But, you know, you of course can customize all those elements through GPU Tweak 3 on the Tough Gaming card. So for the most part, if you're looking to block a card, I do recommend the Tough Gaming series. And, you know, if you're going to go with the Strix series, and especially if you're going to go with a white card, you know, keep the stock heatsink assembly on it, right?
I'm going to take a hot take real quick. If you buy the white Strix series and still put a block on it, you did it wrong.
I think I'll have to agree with you on that
I'm
one. Right? It's
hardlining
such a
up.
beautiful looking card. It wouldn't really make sense at all to do it, especially because even the PCB itself is not white. The PCB is the same color PCB. So really what you're paying for with the white Strix is that really beautiful metal white shroud. So really it does not make sense to water block a white edition card. If you're going to water block a card, high priority, go with Tough Gaming and then go with RG Strix monochrome, so the black version, right? And definitely I would not recommend water blocking the white edition base card under any scenario. It just doesn't make sense.
Agreed. Please don't do it. Just do yourself and everyone a favor and please don't do that. That's my hot take for the day.
All right. I think that's a good one, but I don't think too many people in the community are going to say that one's a hot take. I think that one definitely makes sense. So what else do we got going on, Jake, here? Well, we've kind of talked a little bit about the bundles. If you're going to get an RTX 40 series, Redfall is available. And as always, keep an eye on what's coming out because with a lot of these new games, especially when NVIDIA is pushing it, there may be the opportunities to get a bundle. But JJ, I think you touched a little bit on the promos that we have out. Anything especially exciting promo-wise that you wanted to re-highlight again? Yeah, sure. Let me see if I can go ahead and open up the link for these guys, and we can drop a couple of these in the chat. So, one of the things that we try to do here on the stream as of course in our ASUS PCDIY group. Hopefully, those of you guys that are checking out are a part of our group. If you guys are watching us on Facebook or Twitter, the link for the group should be hopefully in the chat. If not, blame Jake and let him know to make sure to put that link in there. But we've got some promotions right now for the 3070, the 3060 Ti, and the 3060. So for those of you that might be maybe on a little bit more limited budget, maybe to look and upgrade your graphics card, step into a card that can offer you a more modern media engine, be able to offer you things like DLS and video reflex, GeForce Studio, experience all these kind of benefits. These are going to be, so I think, some solid offerings. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what we've got here in terms of some promotions that we've got going on. So I think we can go ahead and swap that banner, Jake, there, if you want to go ahead and swap out on that one. So first up here, we can see we've got a dual. So this is going to be, remember, we've got a few different series. We have like our flagship series, which are ROG Strix series, and then we have our tough gaming series, and then we have our dual series. Dual series cards are going to generally feature 2 fans, hence dual, right? They're still built using the same auto extreme production process. So that means it's using our factory SMT production process to really be able to build a great quality card, right? Goes through the same validation. On cooling performance, generally, of course, the triple fan designs are going to be a little bit better, but still you're going to get cool, quiet cards, and they look great. I really like actually the ID design on the dual series. I think they complement actually a number of different types of builds. They are kind of in this neutral scheme where they're not too heavy, and they're actually, I think, a great choice for those of you who might also be looking kind of for more maybe creator kind of focused GPU, where you don't need to go into something super crazy, but maybe get some acceleration performance in your video editor, your photo editor. So here we can see we've got the RTX 3070. This is the overclocked model. So this does mean that it already has a factory overclock. And you'll see it's normally priced at $580. 10 bucks off right now. It's going to be coming in at $570. And next up here, we've got our 3060 Ti. This is also the overclocked model right here. Again, when I say overclocked, it doesn't mean that the standard model can't be overclocked. It just means that they're factory overclocked and validated, right, when we produce them. That's the only difference, right? You can still even overclock this potentially further if you then want to go into GPU tweak and adjust your power limits or your clock speeds or your voltages or your memory. Those are all still open and available to you. 3060 Ti is normally priced at 500 bucks right now, $30 off, so you can get it for 470. We've got the Tough Gaming 3060 Ti, which is normally 550. This one's 40 bucks off, so that's a nice little savings. That's almost enough to buy you like maybe like another M.2 SSD if you wanted to throw an M.2 SSD, or maybe like 1 or 2 fans. Like our Strix XF120 fans are like on sale right now for 20 bucks a pop. That's like 2 XF120 fans, man. So $510 for the Tough Gaming 3060 Ti. And I didn't note it there in the images, but all of these do have backplates. So the 3070 has a backplate, 3060 Ti has a backplate, and this Tough Gaming also has a has a backplate. In case you're wondering, in terms of the RGB lighting zone, the Tough Gaming card has a very small kind of RGB lighting zone. It's the little RGB lighting zone right here. And then it also has an RGB lighting zone that's on the side. That's it. So it's very minimal, really clean. It looks really nice. And of course, if you just want to turn it off, you can turn it off. The dual cards do feature RGB, but this RGB cannot be controlled or synced. It's just like kind of like a little smooth gradient color that kind of just sequences through. So just keep that in mind, because some people do ask like, hey, I installed the card and it doesn't show up in your Armory Crate software. And that's just because the dual series does not support RGB color and management, okay? So a subtle difference that exists between the dual and the Tough Gaming or the RG Strix series. We then have also here our dual 3060 white. Great option if you want to pair this up with something like our Prime series or ROG Strix series boards. $20 savings, so normally $370 down to $350. Again, this one also comes with a white backplate. Looks great. Very compact card too, so nice, especially even if maybe you're going for like micro ATX or smaller form factor type builds. Another 3060 as well, triple fan with the Tough Gaming. This one right here is, let's see right here, $40 off, so normally $460 and down to $420 in terms of that one. And then we've got one more here. There's actually a few other promos too if you guys are interested in maybe some lower cost options. Maybe you're just looking for a basic upgrade to your system, or maybe a little bit more of an esports or maybe indie gaming type card. We actually do also have a number of 1660 and 1650 graphic cards on promos. But Rounding out our last one here, we got the dual 3060. This is a really compact card. I mean, it's so compact, you could fit this into like a 6-liter chassis. It's that compact. So it's really, really, really tiny. Normally $410 and $20 off at $390. So a few number of different promos. I'm going to go ahead and drop those in the chat, Jake. So let me go ahead and drop those in the chat and see if we got any thoughts or any feedback from anybody there before we get ready and maybe talk about Noctua.
JJ, yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that very shortly. I'm sure a lot of you are rather hyped for that. And since it doesn't look like we have very many comments, I guess we'll move on to it.
All right, so let me go ahead and drop these in the chat here. So just give me 1 second here. Got 2 more links here to drop in for us.
You guys will have links for everything. And just as a reminder, while we definitely focus on RTX 40 series now for a lot of the new announcements, because of course that's the new series, cards like this are honestly an excellent option for anyone that's wanting to get into some of these new games like Diablo 4 and Counter-Strike 2. While obviously we don't have benchmarks or anything yet for Counter-Strike 2, I would imagine, given its history, that's probably not going to be the most graphically intensive title. And Diablo 4 is kind of already proven to be the same. And these RTX 30 series cards do support DLSS 2, which is already going to be available in the beta. So that's, of course, going to carry over into the main game as well. So while you might not get DLSS 3 support and kind of the latest and greatest, these cards that JD has linked should be more than adequate to support playing some of those titles if you're interested in them.
Yeah, and I mean, that 3070 and 3060 Ti, you know, you're talking about cards that can comfortably game, you know, high refresh rate 1080p, high refresh rate 1440p. So you're not talking about cards like that, you know, definitely don't offer a strong level of performance. So they're definitely still very performant cards. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to the games that you play, the resolution that you have in terms of your monitor, and the refresh rate that you're targeting, right? So depending on your kind of demands and kind of your wants and needs when it comes to your game settings, right? You know, that kind of will define, you know, how much you need to kind of go maybe towards one GPU versus another, right? But we like to try to be able to give a good balance here, because the reality at the end of the day is not everybody's going to be able to afford, and not everybody needs, as great as an option it might be, something like an RTX 4080, right? But speaking of the RTX 4080, I think we've got a brand new one, right?
We do. And just to answer your question real quick, Chris, the chair is on sale right now as well.
Oh, yes. I did put a promo. If you guys are part of our ASUS PCDIY group right now, I did put it in the group. The link is there. It's $90 off. So it's actually a pretty nice level of savings. And it ships from the ASUS store for free. So you don't pay for shipping. So it's truly $90 off. So if you're interested in picking up a truly premium chair, it's ergonomic and a wide range of adjustments, it's a really great option. So let's go ahead and take a look at this beautiful Noctua card. I think I've got a little consolidated image here. Nah, I like my image more, Jake.
I like my image more, Jake.
Fine. Use your image.
Yeah. So here you guys can see, right? This is the brand new ASUS GeForce RTX 4080 Noctua Edition. Huge amount of time and effort, as always, right? So the big thing, of course, here is that we continued essentially this collaboration from the prior generation, which we saw introduced the 30 series Noctua, where we had it for the 3070, we had it for the 3080, and so here we're now introducing it for the 4080. Now, sometimes people wonder, it's like, hey, what are kind of some of the key differences? And there's actually quite a number of differences that we actually have to put in terms of the design and development of the card. So I think right here I have another image right here. The actual heatsink assembly that you have actually has to be redesigned entirely. And so we actually co-worked with Noctua. And the reason why we have to actually co-work with them here is that we need to optimize the actual diameter and the fin stack to be optimized for the actual fans. So in default, right, you have to remember that the default kind of PCB in the card is designed for a triple fan solution, right, which also have a different size diameter fans, 110 millimeters, while these are actually quite a bit larger, right? So these are traditional kind of quote unquote chassis or radiator fans. And so ideally, to be able to maximize the performance, we actually kind of shrunk this down, but we thickened it, right? So it got much thicker. This is a 4.3 slot based graphics card, but we actually compressed in the heatsink, and we actually changed also the heat pipe configurations. The total number of heat pipes are actually the same, but we actually changed up the composition between the number of 6mm heat pipes and the number of 8mm heat pipes. And so that all combines together to be able to have a heatsink design that's been optimized for these very, very impressive fans relative to their airflow and to their static pressure. And the end outcome that we ultimately have here is that we have the quietest 4080 on the market, which is quite impressive, because keep in mind that our tough gaming graphics card and our RG Strix cards were already impressively quiet, right? We were talking about those cards were already operating sub 35 dB and were quieter than the FE cards while offering a higher level of clock speed. You're getting the same thing with the Noctua. The Noctua is also faster, cooler, and quieter than the FE, but it's even quieter than the ROG Strix or the tough gaming graphics card, which is quite impressive. And when we talk about the RPM duty cycle, this is where things get really impressive on average for the gaming. Jake right here is sharing actually some little documentation from our friends over on Noctua, but you'll actually see that the fans are nominally working at less than 1,000 RPM when you're talking about normal workload. So I think, yeah, it's going to probably be that one right there, that one that says low fan speed, which is actually the overall nominal average. So you can see right there, 840 RPM. So as I noted, less than 1,000 RPM in terms of it. It's effectively silent is the card. I mean, you would be really hard pressed to hear it. You'll probably hear something else in your system more so than you will hear this graphics card, while at the same time, the temperatures are going to be outstanding. So nominally, 4080s, they can vary, of course, depending on their power target settings and a number of other factors. But you're going to be seeing a card that's going to be operating in the low 60s in terms of its overall temperature. So low 60 degrees in terms of the temperature, super quiet operation, and just an absolutely just beastly card in terms of its overall design and its performance. So really, really excited about offering this card again to users that are really looking kind of for that best-in-class experience. If you really care about acoustics and noise profile, this is the card that you're going to definitely want to keep in mind. Now, a couple of notes is that this will be what we consider a, not a limited edition card. So that doesn't mean that essentially we're going to just produce a couple and we're going to stop. It will be readily available, but it is made in a smaller production quantity than, let's say, our Tough Gaming or ROG Strix series. So actually right now, I don't know if it's still available. I shared it first in our PCDIY group, but this card is right now available in limited inventory right now on the ASUS eStore. So if you do want to pick it up, you can go ahead and pick it up on the ASUS eStore. The MSRP is actually technically set at $1,650, but we actually are working internally with our price management team to do a little bit of a price adjustment for kind of like a bundle promo. So you may see actually maybe in the next stock refresh some bundle promotion pricing that if maybe you pair that up with something like what I showed there in the prior slide, which is maybe like our upcoming Tough Gaming ATX 3.0 power supplies, which would be a great addition to be able to pair up with this or any one of our ASUS 40 series graphics cards. Right here, you can see I announced this actually in our last week PCDIY stream, but we're going to have 3 initial models, and there will actually later be a 1200 watt model. So a little bit of a teaser for you guys. I haven't even told the group that one yet, that there will be a 1200 watt model, but we will have 3 ATX series PSUs that will be available. The one other thing that I will tell people to kind of be mindful of is that it is, again, though, a very large card, 4.3 slots. So you definitely want to double check on your kind of mechanical clearance, make sure that it can fit inside your chassis. And while a lot of the visuals are showing kind of like that front view with the Noctua fans, I do think kind of the more realistic view, especially with the fact that it is a 4.3 slot card, is that you really are going to be looking at the card more like this, in this kind of horizontal kind of orientation, because I think that's the way that it's going to be installed in probably the majority of systems. You may have maybe a chassis like something like the Hyperion, or maybe like our GT502, something like that could be big enough that could fit a vertically oriented Grace graphics card. But keep in mind, it's a big card, so you're going to need a lot of space to be able to make sure that you can clear that correctly. But without kind of taking up all of that, what are your thoughts? What did you think about it when you saw this card here, Jake?
So I'm probably in the minority with this, but I actually appreciate the color scheme. So obviously, like, the cooling performance is there, but that I'm kind of an aesthetics first person. As long as I'm able to, get sufficient performance to run games and everything that I want to. So given that this brings a unique aesthetic to things, like there's a lot of black cards, there are a lot of white cards, a lot of silver cards, and a lot of cards with RGB, etc. So that's already been well done. And I mean, we've got like the white Strix, which I think is the best white looking card on the market to date, even including previous generations. And obviously like the black Strix and tougher no slouch either. But having this gives you a new option to kind of really do what you want. And I think it does well too, because there's definitely a trend of people that are doing kind of those I guess classier styling setups these days, the work from home with, you know, the wood accented table and like the butcher blocks and things of that nature. And if you want your full setup to match, which is something that honestly I put a lot of time into myself, this could be perfect for that. So I think that's something that's kind of overlooked because a lot of people are like, oh, Noctua brown. But when you start especially thinking about a full setup, it matches to a lot more than people give it credit for.
Yeah, and I think the important thing to keep in mind is that, especially I think in this orientation right here, the standard kind of the default, you don't really see a lot of the quote unquote Noctua brown, right? You do have a little bit right there, but it's pretty subtle. You know, and so my opinion, if you put this into a black theme build, if you put it in, you know, with something, whether it's an ROG board or a ProArt series based motherboard, I think actually it's going to look pretty good. It's not going to be that it's going to be like super clash, right? And I think actually, if you have any other Noctua fans in there as well, it's going to easily complement that and look quite nice, right? You guys can, of course, take a look at some of the great builds that have been done from many of those members in kind of our community. Mr. Matt Lee has a couple of recent Noctua-based builds that look really fantastic and show you how, when you bring it together, the one thing that I really actually like about brown is that it inherently has warmth to it. It brings a little bit more warmth than some of that kind of darker voidness that black builds tend to have. And so I appreciate that. I like that kind of little bit more earthy vibe that it provides. And of course, there's no disputing, of course, the performance that you have, as well as the reliability. The bearing quality that you have within these Noctua fans is really industry leading. It's outstanding. You know, for reference, kind of some people are wondering about, you know, when you talk about kind of basic bearings in a fan, the most basic bearings are using usually like a hydraulic bearing, and that's going to probably be rated for somewhere around 40,000 hours in terms of its operating lifespan. Then you kind of can move up to something like an advanced fluid dynamic kind of bearing, which was used like in our tough gaming fans. That jumps all the way up to like 250,000. And that's actually pretty similar to kind of like what you have within a sealed type of bearing design, which Noctua uses. And so when you talk about not just the performance, but also the reliability, it's also really, really outstanding compared to kind of the standard. Now, a lot of ASUS graphics cards use better than standard bearings. We have like dual ball bearings in a lot of our fans, but here you're getting even a better quality bearing that's used in the traditional designs. Now, speaking of, I think, some other differences that you might want to also keep in mind, though, there are a couple. So some people might wonder, like, hey, what might be like a difference between this and maybe the ROG Strix card, right? Because you're starting to kind of look at around the same pricing as well. So the default actually power limits are going to be the same effectively as the other kind of 4080 cards in the market. But like the max power limit is actually higher on the ROG Strix card. So the max power limit, I believe, on the Noctua is going to be like the same as the FE, which is approximately a max power target of 355 watts. And then on the ROG Strix card, you could actually have a max power limit of 420 watts. So that's actually quite a bit of a higher jump in terms of that power limit. Now, you might not necessarily always be able to use that increase, even though it's available to you there, because you have to account for, you know, silicon variance, right? And whether or not the GPU has that kind of the margin to be able to get up the clocks that could actually benefit from that increase in that power limit. That being noted, you know, there are kind of differences. Part of that is also that we kind of see that some people will maybe water block a Strix card and they want more kind of tuning options to push the card a little bit heavier. But part of the big value add with the Noctua is really to get this super impressive heatsink assembly and these fans. So it doesn't really make sense to take a Noctua and then attempt to try to water block it, right? So you're really pairing for that heatsink assembly. So just keep in mind that is going to be a difference in terms of you know, I'd say one of the key performance parameters is going to be that max power limit rating. Here on the Noctua, like I said, it's going to be maximum 355 watts, or like on the ROG Strix, it would be 420 watts.
And just something I want to plug here, HTO kind of commented on it, and JJ, you've mentioned this as well, that unless you're vertically mounting, you're not going to see the fans, but, and this is not recommended, I believe Matt has actually replaced those with the regular Chromax fans. So if you want to mod and maybe potentially void your warranty, you can always change to other colors, or alternatively, our friends over at Cable Mod do offer brown cables. So if you just want to match to that little bit of brown on the side, you can get some cables and do it.
Yep, for sure. So like here's a nice example. I think it would look even better, of course, with a with a tough gaming chassis. But here, here's a recent build from Mr. Matt Lee showing actually off the Noctua. Now this is the prior generation, but it would look pretty much almost identical to that. So here's just an example of how I think that's a great looking build, right? He actually went with the standard Chromax fans, but just went with the brown accents, right? So he didn't actually go with the kind of traditional brown fans, right? He went with the Chromax based versions. And I think that looks really, really nice. So that's a really kind of complementary kind of look and feel right there in terms of what it would look like if you go in that kind of orientation. I think we've got, a couple other images right here to kind of let you see what it might look like there. So you can see right there. And it looks pretty cool. Again, I think it would look even better. I think in the horizontal, that's just my preference, but definitely here to kind of show that off. That's pretty cool. I would also probably say even thermal performance, it would probably perform even a little bit better, because keep in mind right here, he doesn't even have the panel on, right? And so of course you're going to have a little bit less space for breathing in terms of actually intake airflow that you would have comparatively. So, but that's just an example. I think I can go ahead and bring up that image that also he did here when he did the hack as far as the Noctua hack, because some people do ask, yes, can you change the fan? It is actually not too difficult to do the actual disassembly, but I think as you can see right here, I don't think it actually looks as good. I think, to make it kind of Chromax, you would have to design like the whole thing Chromax. So the entire shroud and everything would have to be kind of designed to complement that. And then my kind of, I don't want to say my argument, but I think our rationale would go, it would look then very much like a tough gaming graphics card or an ROG Strix card. Sure, the ID design would differ because we would make sure to purposely design it differently. But at the same time, our tough gaming graphics card looks fantastic, and it's pretty much a monochrome card. It's black already. And the ROG Strix card, even though it has that red and blue on the front, when it goes horizontal, it's the same thing. It's fully black and it's fully monochrome. So we have two cards that are already black. So this would literally have been another card that would have been black. So I think for our perspective, it makes more sense to really double down on that history and heritage that Noctua is known for in our color scheme, and be able to offer something that also really complements, I think, the ID that Noctua is best known for, and that, our ID team and a lot of us internally also really, really like. So just for reference, if you did want to, you could do that. And I did think Jake did note that. Of course, keep in mind that in North America, you don't void your warranty by either like water blocking your card, or even disassembling your card to maintain it. But as always, we don't warrant any indirect, direct, or accidental damage. So if you maybe rip a cable, you nick something on the PCB, that wouldn't be covered under your warranty. So we do always caution that take your time and be very careful if you're going to go about making a modification or disassembly. And if you do replace something, don't throw anything away. Keep everything so that if you do have to put the card back together and send it in for a warranty assessment, you have the card essentially able to be kind of reset back to a factory condition.
Yeah, like you said, JJ, it's definitely unique on the aesthetic design, but like I mentioned, I'm partial to that because exactly like you said, we've already got a black card in both the Tough and the Strix series. So having another black card, regardless of performance difference, it's nice to see something unique. And as Matt's shown, there's definitely some options to make rather nice builds and setups based around it. So I'm all for it.
Very, very cool. So that makes an addition right there. I'm going to see right here. Let me just see if it's still there on our website. And if it is, I will drop a link there in the chat. So we do still have it there, guys. I do believe I checked with our team. This is a very limited quantity. I can't tell you the exact number, but I'm going to tell you, I think it's less than 10. So if you're interested in it, like I said, limited, and then we won't probably have any more restock of this until probably next month. Okay, so just keep that in mind, is that we will continue to be bringing this card actively in terms of inventory, but it will be, like I said, in a smaller, limited quantity. As always, if you guys want to find out about the latest and greatest updates resident to new graphics cards that we have available, always make sure to keep it tuned here to the graphics card stream, the PCDIY weekly stream that we have on Fridays, as well as, of course, to the PCDIY group, where I have featured announcements that we put up regarding any availability on new products and things along those lines. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this link there in the chat.
I gave it to them, JJ. They've got it. I wanted to make sure I got it to them as early as possible so they could get in and get their card if they wanted to.
All right, pretty cool. So I think that rounds us out there in terms of the Noctua, unless there's anything else that you were thinking that you wanted to add in there.
No, I think you already covered everything that we need to know, JJ. But
very, very cool.
Subject
And in case anybody's wondering, I think I did kind of slightly touch on this. I mean, if you don't get it from the name, it says OC Edition. But in case anybody's wondering, this card does fully support overclocking and performance tuning and fan curve tuning. So again, all you need to do is just download the ASUS GPU Tweak 3 utility. So if you guys are interested in using that, just head over to GPU Tweak website. I'm going to go ahead and link that in there in the chat there. But the GPU Tweak 3 utility will allow you to go ahead and make all those customizations if you're interested in. You can save customized profiles. Like I said, adjust the power limit, adjust the clock speeds, memory, all that stuff. It's all available to you. So you can still go ahead and fully customize this card in the same way that you would, let's say, a Tough Gaming or an RG Strix series.
So moving on from the awesome build that Matt did to looking at a couple other awesome builds, we've got 2 spotlights this week. And the first one's actually going to be from Chris Walker.
Okay, yeah, I think I've actually got images here from Chris, so let me see if I can bring this up right here. Yeah, his was pretty cool. When I saw it, I was like, oh man, this actually gave me like a little bit of like deja vu, because I actually have an N1D frame. It's one of my favorite actually chassis. I still have it to this day, and oddly enough, you know what? The fans that I have it are Noctua fans, and some people may be like, that feels really weird, but I absolutely love the brown and red combination. I think it looks fantastic in that build. I really, really love it. So that's actually what I'm running in there. But to his credit, he's kind of gone for really like, this is just about as high end as you can get. This is a very, very high end system configuration where we can see we've got our RG Strix 40 series in here. He went with the latest and greatest. He's got the Thor P2 series in there. So that's our flagship ROG power supply in there. And then he's also got the new latest and greatest Ryu 3 with the 8th gen Asetek based pump in there. And then he's also got a ROG Maximus. It looks like it's the Extreme board that's in there. So an absolutely beastly system. And literally just narrowly fits in that Strix card. But it's pretty sweet. It does look pretty sweet. I think we've got one other image here that actually I think he has it where it's lit up. So let me go ahead and bring that one up. Yeah. So we can see it right here. I think he's still waiting on a couple of other items in terms of actually making some updates. So you guys can also probably follow us not only by checking his kind of other posts that we're going to have in the PCDIY group, but also make sure to check out our upcoming PCDIY Builder Spotlight, where I think he's going to send a couple of other images once he gets everything kind of all situated to kind of wrap everything up. But already from my perspective, it's looking pretty sweet. I mean, you could say, hey, maybe you would want maybe like a custom cable, but the challenge that you definitely always have with the D-frame is that it is not the easiest chassis to deal with from a cable management perspective. So like for me, you literally have to run everything in on the rear of the chassis. You kind of have these hard, of course, frame materials, and you kind of want to tie everything into it. So it just does make it a little bit more tricky. But what are your thoughts, Jake?
So I am probably always going to shill for N1 Signature Series cases. They're just such a unique design. And it was one of the cases that kind of got me into more enthusiast DIY PC to begin with. So seeing this case immediately caught my attention. And I love that instead of packing it full of like water cooling or maybe going a bit overkill on the amount of stuff that you can kind of cram into one of these, especially if you get into modding a little bit, that he's kept it really clean and kind of organized inside. So it's just kind of this like nice showcase piece sitting there. The one thing I will say from my end, and normally I
Yes,
probably agree
actually,
with you, JJ,
so
that
not to cut you off, I just want to note that actually Chris notes that that's the thing that he's actually waiting on, is that he's got actually a custom cable mod cable coming in. So pretty sweet. But you were saying, Jake?
I'm actually really excited to see what kind of color scheme he went for the cables. But for this particular one, I would have liked to seen the GPU be vertically mounted, purely because I know that it's got the red highlight to it, and I think that would have been better showcased in vertical orientation to pair to the case itself. So I would have actually liked to see the difference there and how that would have matched. But overall, just kind of the simplistic nature of both the case and the layout that he's chosen inside, just with this maxed out hardware, props for me for this one.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I love the way that this actually looks. I think the only thing for me is that I actually run my D-frame. I've always run it vertically, so I don't run it actually in this horizontal orientation. And actually, I think it would look cooler in that way because everything kind of would take on a little bit more legibility to it, right? Like you could see that cool line a little bit clearer. You'd be able to see the enemy matrix, but the way he's got it situated on his desk, maybe that kind of fits a little bit better where he likes that vibe. And he's also got it with the lights on here. I think it's also going to have an entirely different vibe. Once the lights go off, it's going to look really kind of cool because you're going to get these little pockets of light and contrast that kind of come up in the build. But overall, it's a really awesome build. Of course, this is seriously built for performance. So Chris, hats off to you, man. It's a very, very cool build. And looking forward to see what it looks like there once you get that custom cable mod cable coming in. I think that's just going to be, you know, of course, the quote unquote chef kiss, right? It's going to just take it to the next level, make it a little bit nicer, right? Already from the awesome system build that you have, man. So thanks so much for being Team ROG, man. It's an awesome looking build. So what else did we got going on, Jake?
Absolutely. So now, during one of the previous streams, we actually showed where Stuart Talks, GGF, had shown off just a partially painted Hyperion and a Strix card. And now we finally get to see how that's turned out and the finished result for it. And as always, he's done excellent work. So I'm really excited to share this one with you guys.
Yeah, so this was the prior one, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so this was already a fact. This was absolutely stunning. And the really cool thing that Stuart did with this build, right, of course, is that he tied in the actual color ID design from the ROG Strix card. So that kind of little splash of that kind of iridescent color scheme that we had from that red going into kind of the blue. And he put that into kind of the paint. And so that perfectly kind of complemented, kind of giving this synergy and this feel. Now, it's interesting because he ended, of course, water blocking the card. So you don't actually get to see the quote unquote colors that he referenced for the chassis. But that's what you're seeing, is you're essentially seeing that Strix color scheme that was on the front of the card being carried through as actually the color scheme that is present throughout the rest of the build. This is always really interesting and cool to see how actually builders and modders kind of interpret our ID design language, because the other really kind of interesting thing is the only thing you see visibly here is actually going to be two products that are not under the Strix family. The actual Hyperion and the Maximus board are actually underneath the formal ROG line, and they actually carry a bit of a different identity in terms of their design language than our ROG Strix products, where ROG Strix has a little bit sometimes more edgy design to it. You have things like cybertext that are also going to be present that you don't see on formal ROG products. But overall, you know, fit, finish, polish, and execution are absolutely outstanding. Love the use that he did in terms of the Hyperion. The space was really, really nicely done, where, you know, it's not definitely the biggest chassis, you know, compared to actually Stuart's collaborative chassis that he did with Lian Li, or something like, you know, even like a larger like Corsair or something like that. There are definitely bigger chassis, but still volumetrically, I always think bigger chassis are harder to work with because you have to kind of fill that negative space, right? And if you don't fill it, it just kind of looks like a hole, right? And so here, a really, really nice job from everything from, you know, the tubing runs to, of course, you know, the to the dual actually reses, right, that are in there, of course, then to the dual radiators where he's taking advantage of the radiators in the front and the top, along with that paint that carries it through. Ultimately just came out fantastic. Really, really beautiful build, and a really nice little touch there where he took the compartment tray and he's like, nope, I'm not going to make that a compartment tray. I'm going to put in an LCD in there and then show off the Armory Crate, you know, user interface, which is pretty sweet. So really, really cool attention to detail in there.
Yeah, he absolutely kills it always. And I've seen this particular mod on a couple systems now. I can't remember who the first person I was to see do it, but I love this. Not that it was ever intended, but it just happens to work so perfectly that these little, I think it's an 8.8-inch screen,
Yeah.
fits in there so smoothly. And then, of course, the cover can like go back and forth across it. So it's such a nice little touch. And then, two, I like that he's taken the time to, even for like the fittings, go with this dual tone to kind of really carry the color scheme throughout everything. And even with the display on the I/O, has done the dual tone lighting for it as well. So he's really made sure to kind of color match throughout the full system and make sure that he's kept the overall like color scheme cohesive, which is not easy to do to begin with. But like JJ mentioned, when you start working in a larger case and you have to not just utilize the hardware, but start intentionally filling space, it becomes that much more difficult to rely on just the hardware itself to pair together flawlessly. And you're having to make up for that and account for it with all of your design and placement decisions. So kudos to
Yeah.
him for being able to pull that
I
off.
also too want to give credit to to Stuart there in terms of the really intelligent kind of choice to go with a color and use the actual frame, right? And so one of the really kind of distinguishing elements of the Hyperion is that X frame design, and putting a color on it immediately also creates a kind of sense for your eye to want to follow certain lines. And you see this actually within cars, I think, especially within older generations, is having those lines help you to kind of go like, man, you want to follow where those lines are going because you see that bold, bright color. So it's a really smart sense. And to that, let's put the tag team here and let's show the second version, right? So this is the most recent one, which also got done here. So there was essentially kind of two versions that got created here. And here we can see we kind of almost go the inverse, where we're keeping very similar kind of color identity, but we kind of inverted it, right? So we went, instead of having that external be that kind of more red, kind of pink iridescent color, here do we go that kind of tealish, kind of blue, kind of pearlescent, iridescent type of color, and looks absolutely fantastic. And then on the inside, he went the opposite. Instead of having like those chrome, you get a really kind of cool color block effect with the pink. And they both look fantastic. I mean, really, I'd be hard pressed to say which one I think looks better. They both look really, really cool. I do say I really do love the artwork right here, though, that is on the side panel. Absolutely looks really, really cool, and just gives it another vibe that I think that, hey, when you all of a sudden then pull that off and you get to see that beautiful system, it's almost like, man, which one do you want to keep on there? It's like, hey, do you, do you keep that panel off or do you keep it on? Because they both actually look really, really cool. But a really fantastic, of course, job through and through. So both of these builds came out really, really great. I will say that I also love the dim choice right here. These dims look absolutely fantastic with just a little bit of this soft diffusion, which I think complements the Bits Power fittings. And he used the same Bits Power block on both of these. They're actually one of my favorite blocks because they have like this ultra live, like high level of like transparency to them, which add like a really, really cool feel to them that you don't traditionally, I think, always get within a block. And it looks quite cool. So really, really nice. Fantastic builds right there. He knocked it out of the park.
Absolutely, as to be expected from him. And honestly, the artwork and stuff, it's not a very common look, but it's something I always appreciate, especially with these larger cases. You really have a canvas-sized area to work with, and utilizing it for something like artwork specifically, I think is always a nice touch, especially when you can have some beautiful artwork like that to utilize.
Yeah, so we got a little feedback. The second one feels bright and happy. Yeah, so part of that is, again, how you playing around with color tones, right? And it's interesting because generally for more people, pink and that kind of red, more reddish tone is going to be kind of a more warm and bright kind of feeling, right? But at the same time, blue, which is more of a cool down, it's interesting. And part of that is because he actually, I think, did a really cool effect here, which H2O Computers picked up on, which is the inside. He actually brighten that up. Whereas in the let's say the other Hyperion build, right, he kept that black, right? And so that gives you just a different vibe where you have a little bit more color play, which just gives you a little bit more vibrancy, right? And then might just make you feel a little bit differently than the other. Some really cool touches. Same thing down here where you can see within this frame material, this is also, of course, a different color. In the standard Hyperion, these are both the same color. They're both black, right? But here, that white carries through with that white, adds a little bit more of your opening up that space as opposed to compressing the space down, and ultimately just has it be really, really cool. But between, I think, Chris Walker's builds and then, of course, these builds from Stuart, absolutely two fantastic, great showcases to show off, RG hardware in two different ways. One, in that kind of really cool, kind of culmination in that open frame, and then here what we have within our latest generation chassis with the Hyperion. But two really cool builds.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more.
All right. So what else do we have? Or is that bringing us more or less towards the end here of our stream?
I think we're close to the end here, JJ. Do you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think that for me gets us pretty close to wrapping things up. So as always, appreciate everybody joining us in here. If you guys haven't, make sure to go ahead and check out the corresponding social media channels that Jake is going to head and throw up on the screen right there. So we've got, of course, new social channels for ASUS Graphics for Facebook, for Twitter, and YouTube. Like we talked about in the very beginning of the stream, keep in mind that our ASUS Graphics Card streams might not necessarily be every week, but as long as you're subscribed or following our channels, you'll find out when we do have those streams happening. And as always, of course, you can always make sure to check out the latest and greatest from ASUS in general by being part of our ASUS PCDIY group, which Jake is also in. And you can also, of course, make sure to check us out in terms of our weekly PCDIY stream, which happens on Friday on the standard ASUS social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. All right, guys. So thanks on my part for joining us here on the stream. Best of luck with your guys' builds. And Jake, anything from you?
No, thanks for joining us, everyone. Again, be sure to join the group, post your own builds. We're always excited to see what you have as well, not just the news that we can give you guys. And make sure that you are, whenever you got the finished builds ready, link to the submission form so that we can start featuring them in our streams as well.
For sure.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Take it easy.